nation, people. We have transitioned from the man and his 12 sons to the nation that became in Egypt. And last week we looked at a people not ready. The slaves now of the Egyptians, the Israelites, when their deliverer comes, are not quite ready to be delivered. Even though they're in bondage, even though they're under great stress and difficulty, they still have problem accepting what God is going to do for them. The plagues come and show not only Egypt and the rest of the world, but the Israelites themselves who God is and what he can do. Until finally in the 10th plague, Pharaoh is ultimately, and the people of Egypt are convinced when God strikes down the firstborn. And the Israelites leave. Which brings us to Exodus chapter 14 and verse 10. You see, Pharaoh didn't stay convinced long. As soon as he let the Israelites out of his sight, he decided that he wanted them back. The Lord hardened his heart, and he began to chase after them. And now here stand the Israelites trapped between the Red Sea and an enemy army. In verse 10 it says, as Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, is there no graves in Egypt in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. You see, the fear of the army sends them into panic. They lash out at Moses. What were you thinking bringing us here? We had it so good serving the Egyptians. That's what we wanted to do. Just leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. Now we're coming out here to die in the wilderness. Then God shows himself out. He divides the Red Sea. The barrier that was trapping them now becomes their point of escape. Not only is the sea split, but the ground that they walk on is dry. It doesn't work that way. It's impossible. It is a miracle. But even more miraculous, as soon as they pass through in the night, by the time the Egyptians are brave enough to take and try to follow them, as soon as the last Israelite walks in, the water goes back to the way it was, and this great army is. And it says in verse 31, when Israel saw the great power that the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. Now, right there should be the end of it, right? That should be where we conclude our talk from last week. You see, it took them a while, but finally they saw enough that they said, this is truth. God is God. Moses is his servant. We're going to listen. We're going to follow. We're going to obey. That's not what happens, is it? That'd be a great ending to the story, but usually you don't just end the story and roll the credits like they do in the movies. See, because Israel is still going to have problems following a God that has already done so much for them. We see it in a few moments when we get to the end of chapter 15, where they begin to cry out for water. Normally, when they got to a place, they just dug and found some water. But here in Marah, the water is bitter. It's undrinkable. And now you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are in desperate need of a water supply, and the only water they have is unusable. But then God does something. Look at chapter 15 and verse 25. He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw that into the waters, and the waters became sweet. And he made them a statute and a regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I put on the Egypt, for I, the Lord, am your healer. You see, God had allowed this to happen because he wanted to show them that it didn't matter if the land didn't produce the right kind of water. He could. He could have Moses go and toss something in the water, and that unusable water would now become perfect. It says he did it as a statute and a regulation. There he tested them. They had said they had feared the Lord. We believed the Lord. But when the first bump on the road came, they began to wonder. It wasn't just at Marah, it was also with what they ate, the manna. In chapter 16, they wondered what they're going to eat. We referenced this a couple weeks ago, that even after they left Egypt, they still longed for Egypt. God said, here, look, I will have bread literally fall out of the sky. All you have to do is go out every morning and pick it up. But what did they say about that manna? Well, they liked it for a while. But all they had to do was follow the rules. Verse 4 tells us, when the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people will go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I walk in my instruction. God had a simple rule. When you go get manna, it will last a day. And that's it. So there's no need to get a week's worth of supply when you go out there to get it. It'll be there tomorrow. You can pick it up then. What did they do? They went out and picked up a whole bunch, and by the end of the day, it said the manna had melted away. The only time it didn't do that was on the Sabbath day, because you didn't have to go out on the Sabbath. You weren't to work on the Sabbath. So he'd tell them, don't go out there. What would they do? They'd go out there and wonder where the manna was. God wanted to see if they would listen, if they would obey. Same thing happens a few verses down with meat. They have manna, but it's not enough. God is literally, raining, down bread from heaven, but they don't want it. They grumble. They ask for meat. So God allows them to be able to capture quail. These large covey of quail would come flying in. They would have this long journey. As soon as they hit the ground, they were exhausted. And you literally could just walk out and pick them up. You didn't have to hunt them. You didn't have to trap them. They were just there for the taking. But they have the same problem. They never quite listen. And they're never quite happy. These things happen over and over again. They're always coming to Moses with their problems. They're always upset about something or the other. The food's not right. The water's not good. And every time they're ready to jump and abandon ship. And then they come to Sinai. If you would turn your Bibles to chapter 19. Here it tells us that it took 3 months of them from leaving Egypt, in verse 1, to where they came before the Mount Sinai. For 3 months, God had been providing manna. He had been able to bring the water from the rock. He had been able to sweeten whatever was poisoned. He provided them with meat. He provided them with bread. They should have known by now that God was trustworthy. But they come to Sinai to formalize the arrangement. Go down to verse 4. God says to them, you see yourself what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among the people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. The reason God brings them to Sinai is they're going to formalize their arrangement. God has been with them all this time, but now is the time where they're going to make an agreement, a covenant. I mean, crudely think about it this way. Up to this point, God has been dating them. He's been showing them that he'll provide for them. He's showing he's going to care for them. But now is the time for them to commit. You say you're going to follow me, you're going to obey me, and I will take care of you. Of course, for the Israelites, this has to be a great thing, right? They were slaves in Egypt, and now they're going to be a people, a nation of priests to serve God. And when they go to Mount Sinai, God's going to reveal himself to them on that mountain, the mountain that they're not even supposed to go up and touch. How he is to be respected, how he is great and mighty and holy. And so they're told, don't even go up to the land, don't touch the mountain or you'll surely die. Let's go down to verse 18. It says now, this is chapter 19, verse 18. It says, now Mount Sinai was in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. And the smoke ascended like smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the mountain, and Moses went up. Think about that scene. How would you feel? How would you feel to be one of those Israelites who has been in bondage your whole life, who has been someone who has been told what to do every day of their life, who could be killed at a moment's notice if you displeased an Egyptian? Now God's presence is among them. The power of God is coming down on that mountain. They saw what God's finger had done in Egypt. They had seen the Red Sea split open, and now that very God is descending upon this mountain in front of them. And Moses is going up to talk to them. How would you feel? I'm sure you'd be afraid, right? Terrified. This isn't something that you see and just go, that's no big deal. You should also be in awe. There would also be a feeling of uniqueness, of being special. God is speaking to us. He wants us to be His people. Then Moses goes up on the mountain and receives from God the beginning of the law. He goes up, he comes back down. And in chapter 20, he receives and starts with them the Ten Commandments. Now, for a lot of people, they think of the Ten Commandments and they think that is the Old Covenant. That's the law. But the Old Covenant was much more than just the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are actually the preamble of the covenant. Think like the preamble of the Constitution. It starts to begin to set up what the powers are going to be, right? It sets up the idea of what's there. The Ten Commandments are God's preamble. In other words, this is what God is going to expect of you. I'm the Lord God. You shall make no idols of me. Put no other gods before me. You're going to behave and live towards each other in a certain way because I'm your God. And God begins to show to them, to negotiate with them, to tell them, if you're going to be mine, here's what I expect of you. And then let's go to verse 18. After they received the commandment, it says, in verse 18, all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. And they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, for we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for your God has come in order to test you, in order that you may fear him and that he may remain with you, so that you may not sin. Why would God come down in the mountain with all the smoke and fire and quaking? God is trying to impress them. He is trying to impress upon them who he is, his power, how important it is that if you're going to live with God, that you respect him. They didn't even want God to speak to them because his very words shook them to the core. Moses, we'll listen to you. God will tell you. You can tell us. Moses says, don't be afraid. God's trying to show you something here. Once again, he's trying to teach you a lesson. So you won't sin. So you'll know what he is. And from that moment on, they began to receive the laws. God starts in. No other gods before me. Don't make an altar. Don't do anything like this. Here's how you're going to live. Here's how you're going to treat other people. Every part of their life is starting to be examined and commanded. And from the next several chapters, that's what we see. They see the basics of the law in chapters 21 through 23. Here's what God expects of you. Here's how God is going to be. Here's how you're going to approach God. Here's the things that you're going to do. And finally, when you get to chapter 24, he's told them enough that he says, do you want to make this deal? Right? Do you want to go along with this? And so in chapter 24, we see the priests come up and the people start to affirm that covenant. We're going to make that deal. The covenant of the blood. The people are saying, we'll follow you, Moses. And Moses goes back up on the mountain. And this time he spends a long time up there. Verse 18 tells us that he entered the midst of the cloud, and he went up for 40 days and 40 nights. One author put it years ago. He said 40 days and 40 nights in the Bible is less than exact time and more just a person was gone for a really so long we began to wonder, right? 40 days and 40 nights, that's that term. But it was long enough that the people began to wonder if Moses was coming back. Because Moses had gone up and come down pretty quick. And he'd gone up and he'd come down pretty quick. And he's bringing them these laws and he's bringing these regulations. But this time he goes up there for quite a long time. And we know that during this period, Moses is getting the rules of worship, the instructions for the tabernacle, for the priest, for the sacrifices, for the holy days. We look and we see all the next chapters. That's what's being told to him. And Moses is receiving all these things, and he's writing them down. In verse 18, it says, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, the tablet of stone written by the finger of God. In other words, God comes down with the official documents written in his hand. So what's been going on while Moses won? It says, now the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain. People assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, this man has brought us up out of the land of Egypt. We do not know what has become of him. Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in your ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. And all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took from his hand, and he fashioned with a graving tool, and made it into a molten calf, and he said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron proclaimed a proclamation and said, tomorrow will be a feast to the Lord. So the next day they rose early and offered burnt sacrifices. They offered peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. What's wrong here? Tell me what's happening. They're worried, right? Moses has been gone a really long time. We've got to do something. Aaron thinks, I've got to do something. These people they're giving up. So what do? Now remember, at this point, they had already received the 10 Commandments, right? They had already started that first elements of the law. And if you go back and look, the very first part of the 10 Commandments is what? Don't build an idol. Don't make an idol out of me. Let's make us another god, and let's build an idol. How do they do it? What does Aaron tell them to do? Take out all your earrings. Where did a bunch of slaves get a bunch of golden earrings from? Do you remember? When they left Egypt, God told them, go tell the Egyptians, give us something. And all the Egyptians are going to give you something to go. In other words, not only are you going to walk out of Egypt, you're going to walk out with all their stuff. Right? And God made the Egyptians favorable, and they gave them all these kings. So all these slaves who had nothing of that sort now are walking out. So they're taking it to violate the very first commandment that he gave them, to create another god. It's interesting here because of what they choose. What do they make? A golden calf. Why would they make a golden calf? Well, if you look into Egypt, you know that one of their gods was that was how they worshipped him. In fact, they found these idols. And it's interesting because whenever you see this in a movie, right, the golden calf is really big. And they said it probably wasn't very big. You could have just done it with a whole bunch, not very much gold. They said they were usually very small and they were put up on an altar, so they were easy to transport. So here they create something that's not their God in order to replace the God that brought them out. The very person who brought them out, they give up on and say, he's gone. Everything, every part of the deal that God had made with them, they're breaking. Aaron, he makes it up and said, here's your God. Tomorrow is going to be the day we're going to come out and worship him. And how do they worship him? They offer the feast. They offer the sacrifices. They sat down to eat and drink. And they rose up to play. Put that in your memory banks. You're going to see that phrase used over and over about what the Israelites do. They wanted their religious festivals to be a joyous, eventful thing. They loved it. Right? We love holidays, right? We love to celebrate the 4th of July with fireworks and hot dogs and hamburgers, right? We like to make all our holidays big and fun. They did too. That's when Moses comes back to the camp. And what does he notice when he walks in the door? Well, not really actually came in the door, but comes down from the mountain. He hears noise. Joshua was there with him. Joshua had been supporting him. Joshua said, what's that noise? It's battle. Somebody's attacking. No, it's not battle. It's singing. It's dancing. What are these people doing? It's not the cry of triumph, not the cry of defeat. It's the sound of singing. Let's skip down to verse 19. Came about as soon as Moses came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hand and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf which he has made and burned it with fire and ground it into powder and scattered it over the surface of the water and made the sons of Israel drink it. Moses is mad. Why is he mad? Because he sees what they've done. Here I'm coming down with exactly how they're supposed to worship. They've already figured it out. They've made an idol and started partying. They want this to be their God. Let me grind it down and make them drink it. Make it a part of them. Verse 21, then Moses said to Aaron, what did the people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? Aaron, what did they do? Did they come out with knives and swords and say, you better build us a god? Because that's the only way, Aaron, I can see you doing something like this, right? Look at Aaron's response. Probably one of the funniest lines in the Bible. Aaron said, do not let the anger of the Lord burn. You know the people yourself, they're prone to evil. They said to me, make a god for who will go before us. And for this man Moses, the man who brought us out of Egypt, the land of Egypt, off, and they gave it to me. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Does that sound like when you're getting on to your little kid? What happened? Well, I don't know. It just happened. It's their fault. I mean, his brother and sister were doing it, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. And they told me to do something, so I got some gold, threw it in the fire, and this was what came out. That's not what happened. He made it himself, right? He took a graving tool. He made it. But he wants to make it seem like he had no part in this because he knows what they did was wrong. But what's God's response? When God responds, in verses, go to chapter 33. Oh, excuse me. Go back up to 7. Well, when God's response to them is basically, I'm done. Look at that verse. Go back to chapter 32, verse 7. He said, the Lord said to Moses, go down at once. Your people who you brought from the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They made themselves a molten calf and had worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, this is your God, O Israel, which you brought up from the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen these people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and I will destroy them and make of you a great nation. See, God knew what they were doing when he was up there with Moses, and he said, I'm done with them. Moses, we'll start over, you and me. We'll figure this out. Because I don't know what to do with these people. Because the first minute I leave them alone, they abandon everything they promised to hold to. So why? Why did they fail so soon? What was wrong with them? How could they go from seeing what they saw? I mean, they saw the Red Sea collapse in on their enemies, and they said, Moses and God, this is it. We believe them. We trust them. We'll follow them. They go to Mount Sinai, and they see the power of God coming down, smoke and fire. They see this immense display of the power of God. They tremble, fearful of God and who he is. Every time they've needed water, it's been provided. Every time they needed food, it fell from heaven. So why is it that the first chance they get, they do exactly the opposite of what he told them to do? Why would God choose a people that way? Why would God say, I'm going to pick these people? You can see God, he's already fed up with them. Every time he's tested them, and says, okay, here's, I'm going to give you this pop quiz, see if you're studying, and all the kids fail it. And he says, okay, we won't count that one. We're going to go over all this stuff. I'm going to go with you line by line. Here we go. And they say, yeah, we know. Just have Moses give us, you don't have to tell us. We'll just hear it from Moses. We'll follow. And the test time comes, and what do? They get every answer wrong. And God says to Moses, I'm done with these people. He's going to say that a lot. Lucky for these people, they have Moses who will stand up for them. But in the end, there's something wrong there. What is wrong with them? I want you to notice where they go to. God provides manna. He makes it as easy as possible, but they won't follow his rules. He provides water, but they still grumble and complain. They get meat, but it's not easy enough. It seems like the easier God makes it for them, the more likely they are to rebel. What's their problem? They sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. They want a God created for them. Why? Because this one's taking too long. Give us something we can see. Give us something we can hold in our hands. Give us something that we can dictate the terms to. God is coming down saying, okay, I'm God, see? Here's how you behave. And they're going, you know what? We would be much... Turn over to Romans chapter 1. It's easy to look at the Israelites and say, oh, man, look at those guys. But what they did isn't any different than what all of mankind has done. Romans chapter 1, verse 21 says, for even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculation, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They knew God. He was right there in front of them. God had never been more obvious than he was on Sinai. He had never been more direct. Here is here's the handwritten copy of what I wanted by the very finger of God. I'm speaking to Moses face to face. Here's what I tell you to do. But notice they did not honor him as God. Yeah, we see what God can do, but we want to really have an idol that we can take with us. Make that our God. We don't know what happened to Moses. Give us something we can put our hands around. Give us something that's ours. Continuing on in verse 22, professing to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of an incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over to their lust of their hearts, to impurity, so their bodies would be dishonored among them. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. See, what Paul is describing here in Romans is the summation of why mankind is where he is. Paul is trying to tell them that Jesus Christ came to be their Savior from sin. But before he can do that, he has to convince them that there's something that they need saving from. Because they think they've got it figured out. We can create gods and then do things to please them, and that will be good. But they're serving the creation rather than the Creator. They're making God in their image instead of being conformed to His image. Instead of honoring God as God, the same mistake people make today. Holiness versus happiness. What were the Israelites seeking? We want better water. We want better food. We want to make it easier. I mean, manna literally fell from heaven, and you would have thought that this was the worst food distribution they'd ever received. And go outside, you pick it up, it's there. All they did was complain about it. They walked out of Egypt not having to fight one battle with the spoils of war. Well, why'd you bring us out here to die? How could they be so ungrateful to God who had done so much for them? It was easy, because all they cared about was making themselves happy. God, you're taking too long, so we're going to do something else. God, you're telling us something. Well, we changed our mind. We're going to do it this way. All they were really seeking was pleasing themselves. Up to that mountain, he said, don't touch it. You know why? Because I'm holy and you're not. Every law that he gave them was to make them holy. If you want God's presence to dwell among you, then you have to be holy, because I am holy. Why did God care about if they committed adultery or they robbed? Today, people, they know they need God, because they recognize that their life is empty without it. There's too many things. That's what Paul starts off this passage by saying. There's too many things in creation that point to a Creator for us to ignore it. But the problem is, if there's a truth of God for a lie, and worship the creation rather than the Creator. And then we can do whatever we want. That's where Paul will go on. We don't have time to go through it tonight. We'll actually be talking about it some later in some other passages. But we can decide everything we want. If we don't like something, well, we can make it okay. Sunday night we're going to be God even has anything to say about it. But to serve God, it doesn't work that way. Honoring God is not telling God how you're going to come to Him. If God is who He is, then we come to Him on His terms. That's what God was trying to tell them on Mount Sinai. He was trying to show them how big and strong and much more than He was than they, and they still ignored Him. And people make the same mistake they did then, the same mistake that Paul describes in Romans, exchanging the truth of God for the desires of ourselves.